Welcome to the Cybersecurity TLDR show, where we save you time by providing you the too long didn't read summary of cybersecurity topics and news. You can find us on YouTube with video and all the popular podcasting platforms for audio on the go. Now let's get over to your host, John Good. Welcome. This is the Cybersecurity TLDR show. I am your host, John Good, and this is where we talk about all the different news that's going on in the world for cybersecurity. Now, this is going to be your threat intel briefing for the week of July 31st, 2022 through August 6th, 2022. So we're almost to the end of the year here. So if you are watching on YouTube, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe to the channel and leave us a comment as well if you have questions, you want to see certain types of content or anything like that. And then also, if you're listening on podcasting platforms, because we are available on all the major platforms, so iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff. Make sure to subscribe or follow us and leave us a review. Let us know how you enjoy the show. If you think there's things that we can do better or anything like that. I love feedback and just overall making the show and the whole production better. So make sure to do that for us as well. So with that being said, the last thing is in the description, you will find a link to the show notes. So if you want to check out the actual articles that we're talking about, see a little bit more about them, then definitely check that out as well. That will be on my website, johngood.com. But again, the link will be in the description. So make sure to check that out as well. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and jump into the articles here. So the first article was North Korea linked Sharp Tongue spies on email accounts with a malicious browser extension. North Korea linked actor Sharp Tongue has been using a malicious extension on Chromium-based web browsers to spy on victims' Gmail and AOL email accounts. The Sharp Tongue's toolset was detailed in a report published by Huntress in 2021. However, in September 2021, Velexity began observing the use of a previously undocumented malware family in the last 12 months. Velexity has responded to multiple security incidents involving Sharp Tongue, and in most cases, threat actors used a malicious Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge extension tracked as SharpExt, so SharpExt. Unlike other extensions used by the Kamuski APT group, SharpExt does not try to steal username and passwords. Rather, it accesses the victim's webmail account as they browse it. The current version of the extension supports 3 web browsers, and it's able to steal the content of emails from both Gmail and AOL webmail. So, definitely an issue just in general whenever you're installing browser extensions or any kind of third-party application like that. Specifically with the emails, that's pretty interesting that they're really kind of just monitoring and seeing what you're doing. It's definitely one of those things where it's, you kind of wonder what they're looking for, right? Like, what are they specifically monitoring for? Obviously, a lot of general email traffic is kind of boring. If it's a work email or a corporate email, obviously it's probably going to be a little bit more interesting as far as a country like North Korea or one of these APT groups concerned. But I guess you could get like serial keys and, some juicy information, stuff like that. You can find better ways to target victims, right? Because if you know what kind of emails that they get and what they open, then that's, definitely good intelligence. Now, the attack process that it lays out here, it says the attack chain starts with attackers manually exfiltrating files required to install the extension from the infected workstation. Once a breach targets Windows system, the attackers replace the browser's preferences and secure preferences. So they start changing some of the settings. Then attackers manually install SharpExt using a VBS script. Threat actors enable the DevTools panel within the active tab to spy on the email content and steal attachments from a victim's mailbox. This action is done using a PowerShell script named dev.ps1. So those are the PowerShell scripts, what their extension is. And the attackers also hide warning messages running developer mode extensions. So if you're not familiar with what developer mode is, a lot of browsers and applications, they have this kind of developer mode. And basically, it unlocks some different capabilities so you could kind of test things, right? So if you were developing an application and you wanted to test it on your browser, in this case, you could turn on the developer mode, use some of those tools, and unlock some of those additional features that you wouldn't really have a use for in normal circumstances. and they're kind of, they're taking advantage of that, and they're using it to their benefit to get your attachments and watch your email and things like that. So definitely interesting. It didn't really, at least I didn't see it saying, targeting businesses or individuals. I mean, Gmail and AOL email accounts, that's probably going to be more likely that they're targeting individuals, right? So end users, and they're trying to get some kind of data, right? They're trying to maybe plan something larger where they can get a bunch of victims. So definitely an interesting read. Next article, we're likely only seeing the tip of the iceberg of Pegasus spyware use against the US. So this is really interesting because we've talked about Pegasus before. Google and internet rights groups have called Congress to weigh in on spyware, asking for sanctions and increased enforcement against the so-called legitimate surveillance makers. During an open House Intelligence Committee hearing on Wednesday, U.S. lawmakers heard testimony from Citizen Labs senior researcher John Scott Railton, Shane Huntley, who leads Google's threat analysis group, and Karine Kanimba, whose father was the inspiration for Hotel Rwanda and who has herself been targeted by Pegasus spyware. This, of course, is now the infamous malware that's developed by Israeli's NSO group, claims is only that it's sold to legitimate government agencies, not private companies or individuals. Once installed on a victim's system or device, Pegasus can, among other things, secretly snoop on that person's calls, messages, and other activities, and access their camera without permission. NSO also claims that the software can only be used for the purpose of preventing and investigating terrorism and other serious crimes, despite numerous reports from Citizen Lab, Google, and the media of Pegasus being used to spy on journalists, activists, and politicians by their opponents. So we've seen a lot of news articles about Pegasus. Even on this show, we've had this come up several times. If you go back a few episodes, you'll remember that we talked about L3 Harris, which is a defense contractor here in the United States, who was actually looking at potentially buying Pegasus, right, and acquiring all of that. And, Pegasus continues to be in the news. I think it's in particular because it's, spyware. And a lot of times we see this kind of coming up where individuals, kind of like what it said, like politicians or journalists that are being targeted, right? And this is only supposed to be for countries to, have, but there are either, other people that have this software, or some of these governments and countries are misusing this software from what it was supposedly intended to be, right? And, there's a lot of controversy with kind of spying and monitoring in general, especially from governments and, countries, right? Because it just, a lot of countries don't accept that. They don't want to be spied on. Their citizens don't want to be spied on. And so that's part of why we, constantly keep seeing this come up. But it's kind of like what I say every time that we hear about this. This isn't going anywhere. This is going to keep coming up because Pegasus just keeps making headlines, right? They keep showing their face. So I think we'll continue to see some articles about them. So next article, Akame, we stopped record DDoS attacks in Europe. So Akame, I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right, but Akame Technologies squelched the largest ever distributed denial of service DDoS attack in Europe earlier this month against a company that was being consistently hammered over a 30-day period. According to the cybersecurity and cloud services vendor, the height of the attack hit on July 21, when over a 14-hour period, it peaked at 659.6 million packets per second. So MPPS is the abbreviation for that, and 853.7 gigabits per second, GBPS, right? Sparling didn't name the targeted company, but said that it is one of their customers in Eastern Europe. Over a 30-day period, the company came under attack 75 times via multiple vectors. The user datagram protocol, UDP, was the most popular vector used in the attack and was seen in the record spikes. Other vectors included UDP fragmentation, ICMP flood, reset flood, send flood, TCP anomaly, TCP fragment, push ACK flood, fin push flood, and push flood. Data scrubbing systems were able to weed out most of the dodgy traffic. So those in particular, like the reset flood, push act flood, these are all options that can be set in data packets. So don't really worry too much about that. It's just different kinds of settings basically on there. At least for the context of this article, you don't have to really know super in depth, what that means. But traffic from the distributed attack suggested that the criminals were leveraging a highly sophisticated global botnet of compromised devices to orchestrate this campaign, Sparling wrote. No individual scrubbing center handled more than 100 gigabits per second of the overall attack. So just think about that. That is so much data that is being, sent towards this victim. And, apparently they were able to stop this or stop, a huge chunk of it to where it didn't make a huge impact. And, I think that's one thing to really think about is some of these companies that really specialize in this. So like content distribution networks or, things like that, like Cloudflare, all those kind of vendors, they really have this significant infrastructure to stop a lot of these mass scale attacks. And I think that as Internet of Things kind of grows, we continue to get more and more devices, everything gets connected, then those vendors are obviously going to scale as well. As an individual company, you want to definitely look into one of these services because especially as you start getting traction, I mean, if you're just a small business or something like that, you're probably not going to have enough resources to stop that many packets, right? It's just how it is. They're going to literally slow down your entire network if they don't crash your entire network. So, just kind of an emphasis point on the capabilities of some of those vendors and how much traffic they can protect you from, right? Especially if you're doing things that are going to irritate people as part of your business practice, like what your product or service is. Some are going to attract more attention than others for sure. And I would definitely recommend looking into one of these services. Let's see here. So Australian police charge man with developing software used by more than 14,500 people. An Australian man faces up to 20 years in prison for allegedly creating and distributing spyware that became the subject of a global law enforcement operation. The 24-year-old man, who has not been named by authorities, was arrested by the Australian Federal Police, the AFP, and appeared in Brisbane court Friday, where he was charged with 6 counts related to computer offenses. So this was last Friday. And he, not this one that just passed, but the one of the previous week. He is accused of creating the imminent monitor remote access Trojans to the rat when he was 15, which authorities say was sold to more than 14,500 individuals across 128 countries. So what was that? Nearly 10 years, 9 years difference, right? The tool was sold for about $25, which was advertised on hacking forums. It's estimated that the creator made between $300,000 and $400,000 from malware, from selling the malware between 2013 and 2019, when it was taken down as part of a coordinated law enforcement campaign. So, this is an example of, somebody pretty young who is able to create something relatively sophisticated, right? Chances are that this person, might have done a lot of this or maybe had help, maybe was able to copy some code or something from other places. But today we start seeing this kind of ransomware as a service type deal, right? Where, and this is kind of going on a little bit of a tangent, but we start to see where it's becoming easier and easier for anybody to really develop, something that can cause a lot of issues, right? I mean, this was 14,500 individuals, and he created it basically when he was 15. That's pretty crazy. And made some decent money from it, frankly. But yeah, that's something that we have to be very aware of, because a lot of these tools that are out there, especially today, a kid gets a hold of it, they can do some real damage. So I think that, it's definitely something that we have to kind of keep our eyes on, and hopefully, kind of as the cybersecurity environment and workforce and everything grows, and we get more people that are educated on cybersecurity, maybe we can start to stop some of these younger people from doing some of this malicious stuff, at least, earlier on, and kind of get their superpowers for good, right? Somebody like this that created this, I mean, probably a pretty talented individual, right? And if we can get them to be on the good side, then that can definitely help us, right? So, see. So this next article is pretty interesting. Researchers discover nearly 3,200 mobile apps leaking Twitter API keys. Researchers have uncovered a list of 3,207 mobile apps that are exposing Twitter API keys in the clear, some of which can be utilized to gain unauthorized access to Twitter accounts associated with them. The takeover is made possible thanks to a leak of legitimate consumer key and consumer secret information, respectively. Singapore-based cybersecurity firm CloudSec said in a report exclusively with Hacker News, and that's where this article came from. Out of 3,207 apps, 230 apps are leaking all four authentication credentials, and they can be used to fully take over the Twitter accounts and can perform any critical sensitive actions, the researcher said. So if you're not familiar with what API keys are, basically it's a way to programmatically interact with applications, right? So instead of me having to physically log into like Twitter, right, in this case, an API key can behind the scenes interact with Twitter. So I can build out an application that can still pull in that data, but I can add additional features and things like that you can do. And so we see, a lot of applications have API keys, right? Like that's a pretty standard development thing, especially with web applications. And so like with this would be an API key to allow you to log in and authenticate. And, if these applications are leaking these keys, that's pretty dangerous, right? Because then somebody could get into your account theoretically, especially if you don't have two-factor authentication set up. So, anytime you have an application, you definitely have to be careful as far as where that application came from. If you're in the enterprise, you have to be careful as far as those API keys and how that information is handled, right? Because think about this. If this was a business, would you be safe if your authentication credentials are getting leaked? I mean, that'd be really bad, right? For a consumer account, I mean, it's less bad because, the impact is less, right? It's more isolated to you, but, that's not a problem just for individuals. That is a problem that exists in enterprise applications and applications that you would use in your business. So you have to be aware of that. If you're developing applications, you have to use secure coding practices. So you have to make sure that API keys aren't leaked. You have to make sure that they're secure. All that transmission is secure, especially when it's with like authentication, all that kind of stuff should be encrypted and protected and not visible to, the standard attacker, right? All right. Mobile store owner hacked T-Mobile employees to unlock phones. A former owner of a T-Mobile retail store in California has been found guilty of a $25 million scheme where he allegedly accessed T-Mobile's internal systems to unlock and unblock cell phones. Argosty, I can't even pronounce this name. I'm not even going to try. 44-year-old allegedly ran a scheme between 2014 and 2019 where he unlocked devices from the cellular networks of their vendor and enabled people to use them with other telecommunications providers. This scheme impacted mobile carriers who offer these devices to customers at a special price or even free of charge, offsetting the cost by locking them for some time on their networks. So basically what happens is, a lot of times when you go buy a cell phone from a vendor, and especially in the United States, a lot of times that vendor will lock that device to their network for a certain period of time. So maybe like 2 years. Because a lot of times too, what we have here in the US is a lot of the cell phone providers, they will offer you like a contract and they will subsidize your phone or you'll pay your phone off over like 2 years or whatever. And so that's basically why they lock it to their service because, they want to recoup their costs, right? And they don't want to have you go get a phone, be delinquent on your service, and just run off with the phones and profit from that, right? And so that's the whole idea behind it. Now, one of the things that's interesting too with this is that, think about if you have your phone stolen or lost, right? You lose your phone. Well, typically you'll call up your cell phone provider, you'll tell them, "Hey, my phone is stolen, my phone is lost, whatever." And especially if it's like stolen, they will put it on like a block list. Uh, Basically it's a blacklist of devices, right? So these devices are stolen, they can't be activated. And sometimes, there's some cooperation with providers and things like that, and all kinds of stuff, right? But that's the idea, right? So they get on this list and then you can't activate them. So if let's say I had Verizon, and then I found a phone, right? And then I went to activate it and it was reported stolen, and I tried to activate it, it wouldn't activate. I could not use that on my account, even if that was a Verizon phone, right? That's the whole idea. But this person actually had access to T-Mobile's system that control all that. So they were able to actually take devices off of that list. Now that can be, from a monetary standpoint, obviously there is some incentive if you can do that. It's not right? Like it's not, I'm not condoning that, but you could certainly charge for that. And that's what basically this guy did. And, $25 million scheme. That's crazy. That's a lot, right? He must have been doing this, for a while. I said 2014 to 2019. So, 5 years. I mean, that's probably a lot of devices. 25 million. That's not small chump change, right? So definitely interesting. That's where, especially with this, you have to have least privilege. You have to restrict people and their accounts and what they can do. You have to make sure, that access is checked, that you have ways of validating actions, that only authorized people can make changes and stuff like that. And, T-Mobile, they've definitely had some issues just, in the news, especially lately. I mean, this is an issue. They obviously had a big data breach. So I think, by and large, I think T-Mobile has had some issues. Not to say that other vendors probably don't have issues too, but they've been in the spotlight a little bit, probably too much, right? So pretty interesting. EU missile maker MBDA confirms data theft extortion, denies breach though. MBDA, one of the largest missile developers and manufacturers in Europe, has responded to rumors about a cyber attack on its infrastructure, saying that claims of a data breach of its systems are false. A statement from the company clarifies that it was the target of a criminal group who spread the false news of hacking its information systems in an attempt to blackmail the organization into paying a ransom. The extortionists had acquired MBDA data from an external drive used by the company's Italian division and demanded a ransom to not leak or sell the files. So, definitely a little bit to unpack here. The first thing that comes to mind for me, well, a couple things, right? So an external drive, right? Today, the idea of not encrypting your hard drives is just crazy, especially at an enterprise, and especially with this kind of data, right? Like you're just crazy if you don't want to encrypt your drives. Yes, it can take some work. It can add a little bit to your workflow. And then obviously you got to figure out how to maintain those keys and keep them safe to, decrypt the information. But, somebody got a hard drive with a bunch of data on it. Most likely not encrypted, right? Just based on this article. That's dangerous, number one. The other thing too is when you have other divisions, right? Like other business units in other countries or whatever, you have to have very similar standards, right? Like you have to actually make sure that things are running securely. And obviously you have to follow the laws and stuff that are in those, areas, but you can't just have this other business unit and kind of neglect it or not pay attention to the security of, of that unit. That's just not good, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, That seems like, pretty common sense that you can't just neglect other locations. But I think, that encryption is one of the biggest issues probably with that, because at least if you have it really encrypted, then if somebody finds it, somebody steals it, they can't use it, right? Now we do have quantum computing. Remember that. We've talked about that. That's coming up. That could change things, right? Like you have to get even more secure encryption. But yeah, it sounds like they didn't do a great job as far as protecting data. New York regulators slap Robinhood's crypto business with $30 million fine. So if you're into cryptocurrency, this is, definitely a very interesting article. And the latest in what seems to be a string of challenges the company has to grapple with, Robinhood's crypto division has been slapped with a $30 million fine by the New York State Department of Financial Services. It's the first crypto-focused enforcement action by the regulator, which has issued the multi-million-dollar penalty against Robinhood for what it says are violations against the state's anti-money laundering and cybersecurity regulations. The company also failed to transition from a manual monitoring system, which is no longer sufficient, now that it's much larger than when it started. In addition, the department found that policies within Robinhood's cybersecurity program aren't in full compliance with official cybersecurity and virtual currency regulations. The New York regulator has also mentioned that Robinhood improperly certified compliance with the department's transaction monitoring regulation and cybersecurity regulation. Okay, so a lot to unpack there, right? If you're familiar with crypto, I mean, crypto is going through a really tough time right now, just in general, right? Like all the crypto markets. But you look at a company like Robinhood, who has been in the spotlight a lot as well, and I would say that I'm surprised, but I guess I'm not entirely surprised, because it seems like when they get in trouble, they get in trouble for things that seem like they should be fixed, right? Or should have been fixed kind of as they grew. And, this is kind of no different in my eyes, but, let's look at what this says. So they failed to go from a manual monitoring system, to something more automated. I mean, that's kind of, 101 as far as cybersecurity, right? Like you're ingesting so much information from all these different devices, all these different sources. You have to have an automated monitoring system. You can't have somebody going line by line and trying to sort through millions or maybe billions of transaction records, or just records in general. A company like Robinhood, probably every time you make a transaction, right? Like, so every time you buy some crypto, so if you buy like $1 worth of crypto, then you buy another $1 worth of crypto, these small transactions, everything in that, like all of those are going to create some kind of record, because, you got to track different things, right? And, to have a manual monitoring system and be that kind of company where, I could understand if you weren't a data centric company, right? Like if you were a manufacturing company where you were very small, you hardly had any kind of data, that you were storing really, okay, maybe, right? Like you could maybe get by with a manual system. It wouldn't be recommended, right? Like we want to go automated as much as possible, especially like with routine kind of things. But, a company like Robinhood, they get so many transactions. I wish that I knew how many transactions they got, but I'm sure it's a ton, right? Like how could it not be? And they still were using manual monitoring. That sounds like trying to be really cheap, right? I could be wrong, right? Like there's always kinds of different things that could be issues, but that's what comes to mind when I think of that. And then let's see here. The cybersecurity program policies aren't in full compliance with official cybersecurity and virtual currency regulations. So anytime you're dealing with any kind of currency, I don't care if it's cryptocurrency, I don't care if it is like dollars or whatever, right? Like the official currency of whatever country. There are more requirements and more restrictions on things that you have to track. And, you have to make sure that you're compliant, right? There are teams, large teams of compliance individuals in some of these major institutions, right? Like take a like a Fidelity, a Charles Schwab, a Chase, a Wells Fargo, whatever. they have huge teams of people that are making sure that their policies and things like that are in place and they're compliant, right? And as things change, that they update or replace or whatever, right? To make sure they're compliant. So it feels like, as they grew, they didn't necessarily expand their team, or at least they didn't expand their team with people that were able to execute on some of this stuff. Because, this is serious stuff, right? Like that, I don't know, in the grand scheme of things, 30 million, like what that equates to as far as like their overall revenue. But, that's not a small fine, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, I mean, $30 million is $30 million, right? That's a big deal. And it looks like these New York regulators are really, they're trying to go after them. And I mean, it sounds like they're going to be successful. And if things don't get fixed, there's going to be more fines and things. So compliance is a really interesting area to get into if you're ever interested in it. I would definitely check it out. There's a lot of people that break into cybersecurity, into compliance first. But, especially in today's world, there's more and more compliance requirements and things like that are coming up that are getting implemented and enforced. And, privacy things are coming along. And, it's just a really good area to get into if that kind of thing interests you, right? And the money's good too, right? There's a lot of good paying jobs in that area because look at this, $30 million because they didn't do some stuff, right? Chances are, companies, even like Robinhood, I bet getting fined $30 million probably didn't feel all that great. So I bet they're probably going to be looking at hiring some more security people, specifically in compliance, I bet, to try to take care of some of this stuff, right? So that's my thought. We'll, we'll kind of see, right? Because just because something like that happens does not mean that it's going to get fixed. Doesn't mean it. Sorry. But we'll see. Flashpoint says it's VulnDB records vulnerabilities that MITRE CVE missed. Cyber threat intelligence company Flashpoint said in a report issued this week that it detected a total of 11,860 vulnerabilities in the first half of 2022, with almost a third of them missed or not detailed by the public MITRE CVE, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures database. The report's state of vulnerability intelligence includes disclosures, security vulnerabilities in hardware and software products reported by vendors and cybersecurity experts, collected by Flashpoint's in-house vulnerability intelligence database, VulnDB. Flashpoint said that there's a huge discrepancy in the severity and classification of vulnerabilities that are reported by VulnDB and those that are recorded by MITRE's CVE database and the NVD database maintained by the NIST, so the National Vulnerability Database, and that's maintained by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technologies, that's NIST. NIST and MITRE coordinate their finding and report similar vulnerabilities. Flashpoint cautioned organizations to depend on comprehensive and specific sources for a clear understanding of the vulnerability landscape. So, like a lot of things, you have to use multiple sources. This is just a good example of why you need to do that. Because if you're relying on a single source for all your threat intelligence, then you're probably going to be missing certain things. Will it be a lot? Will it be a little? We don't know, right? Like it depends on the different sources and things like that. But, they're saying that a third of what they had weren't covered. So I don't know what that is, almost 4,000 vulnerabilities, right? That's a pretty substantial miss, right? And, it could be that, I guess there's a bunch of reasons, right? Why they didn't include them. But, that's a lot, right? So I would definitely recommend using multiple sources so that, so that you don't miss things, right? So, well, that is the last article for this threat intel briefing. Again, check the description. There will be link to the show notes. You'll be able to check out all the articles if you're interested in reading more. This was your threat intel briefing for July 31st, 2022 through August 6th, 2022. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as well as leaving a comment. And also, if you are listening on the podcasting platforms, because we are on podcasting platforms, and you can listen there as well. But make sure to subscribe and leave us a review too. Let us know how we're doing. And with that being said, that's going to be it for this week. And I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll see you next time.